The ability to create precise selections is what separates good Photoshop work from great Photoshop work. Here are some tools to get you there.
Photoshop has two sets of tools that come in handy when making basic manual selections. Let's see how they work. We're going to open up an image. We'll go to our Chapter 4 folder and select the file titled Marquee. The very first tool we're going to work with is, well, you may have guessed, the Marquee tool. It's the very first tool in our Tools panel. If you do not see a rectangle here, I want you to click on this bottom right disclosure triangle and scroll up and select Rectangular Marquee tool. In my image on screen, you can see two guides. If you do not see guides on your screen, I want you to go up to the View menu, Show, and select Guides. The last thing I'm going to do is change the screen mode. I'm going to go up to the mode switcher and select full screen mode with menu bar. I could have also used our handy shortcut, the F key. Now, using the rectangular marquee tool could not be any easier. You simply click and drag and draw any type of rectangular shape that you want. If you want to constrain your shape to a square, you click, drag, but on the keyboard you hold down the Shift key. And no matter how big or small you make it, you're automatically constrained to a square shape. Note that the point at which I click and drag becomes the upper left-hand corner of my selection. But there's a way to make that the center point of the selection. I'm going to move my mouse directly over the intersection of these guides, and if I click and drag, you can see that intersection is the upper left-hand point. But if I hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on the PC, that starting point now becomes the exact center of my selection. Let's take a look at the choices that we have up in the Options bar. The very first icon here on the left is the New icon. That's what we've been using, so if you have a selection that you've drawn and you draw a second selection, this option automatically wipes out the first selection. Moving here to the right, we have the Add selection. So I'm going to start with the first selection. Now, notice that my cursor has a plus sign at the bottom. Any selection that I draw now will be added to the first one. So we're not wiping out the first one automatically. If we go over here, our next choice is Subtract. And this one, our cursor has a minus sign at the bottom. If I drag anywhere over an existing selection, that area of overlap will be deselected. Finally, we have the Intersect option. Now this one gives an X at the bottom of our cursor. And watch what happens. If I click and drag, the only area of the selection that ultimately will remain is where these two intersect. So I've got a thin sliver over here on the left, and if I release the mouse, that is the only part of the selection. Let's go back to our default. Under the Style menu, we've been working in normal mode. But suppose you want to have a fixed ratio or specific proportion for your image. We can simply go to Fixed Ratio, and here I've set it to a 6:7 proportion. So if I drag, no matter what I do with the mouse, I'm always going to be constrained to a 6:7 ratio. Underneath this, we've got Fixed Size. Now this one is interesting. Right now it's set to 3 inches by 3 inches. And this time I don't have to click and drag. I've already told Photoshop the dimensions of my selection, so all I have to do is click, and I have automatically a 3 by 3 inch square. Once we have a selection, we can move it. If I bring the mouse inside my selection area, notice that the cursor turns into a white arrow with a little rectangle around it. We can simply click and drag and move the selection anywhere we want to over the image. Once we've drawn a selection, what can we do with it? Well, if I move my mouse inside the selection and hold down the Control key on the PC, Command key on the Mac, note how my cursor changes. I can now cut the selection out of the image. So if I click and drag, I've now cut this out and made a hole in the image. I'm going to do Control Z on the PC, Command Z on the Mac to undo that. Just one last thing I want to show you. We'll go back up and set normal mode. I'm going to draw a shape. Now, up to this point, we've been drawing a shape around the areas that we want to select. That would be the inner contents of this shape. But if we go up to the Select menu, we can scroll down to Inverse, and we can invert the selection and select everything that we did not draw with that shape. So this time, with Inverse selected, if I go inside my selection area, and on the Mac, if I press the Command key, Control key on the PC, and drag, I am now removing that inverted selection. Everything we've been doing with the rectangular marquee tool applies equally as well to the second tool that it is grouped with, and that is the elliptical marquee tool. The difference here is that you're starting with an elliptical shape. You can hold the Shift key to make a circle. Everything else is identical to what we've just been doing. The last two tools in here work a little bit differently. We have a single row marquee tool and a single column marquee tool. These allow us to click and make a selection of a single row or a single column of 1 pixel's width. Let's take a quick look at how that would work. I've selected the single row tool. I'm going to clear our existing selection. The keyboard shortcut is Command D on the Mac, Control D on the PC. And now with a single click, I have selected a row across the entire image that is exactly 1 pixel in height. If I go and select the single column tool, I can now click and select 1 column that is a single pixel width. Now we're going to move on to the lasso tool. To do that, we're going to close this document. I'm going to close it with Command W on the Mac, Control W on the PC, and we're not going to save this, so just hit Don't Save. We're going to go back to our Chapter 4 folder and open up the selection image. Before we get started with the lasso tool, I'm going to hit F to take us into full screen mode with menu bar, and I'm going to hit Command 0 on the Mac, Control 0 on the PC just to fit this image to screen. And the first lasso tool that we're going to use is the freeform drawing tool. It's just called lasso, and it's the first option in the lasso tool panel. This tool works by allowing us just to click and draw in a freeform manner. So I'm going to click, drag it around, and draw, and wherever I let go of the mouse, we're going to automatically have a completed shape moving from our first point to our last point. So there we've got this freeform shape, and again, if I move the mouse inside, I can move the shape. If I move the mouse inside and hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on the PC, I can cut this shape out of the image. Let's undo that with Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC. Now the second tool here residing in the lasso tool panel is going to be a bit more useful. It's the polygonal lasso tool. And this works a little bit differently. Here we're going to click, drag, and click repeatedly. We're going to just connect straight line segments. So if I click here and then drag, and click again, you can see that I'm just creating straight line segments. In this case, around the gentleman in this image. They're all straight lines, and we're just setting anchor points in between them. So I can simply click repeatedly. I'm just making a very rough outline of his shape. When you're ready to close the selection, and with this tool you have to do it manually, you can see that my cursor now has a circle beneath it. Once you see that circle, you know that your next click will complete the selection. Now I have a selection, and again, we can move this selection or we can cut out the object. The final lasso tool that I'm going to talk about is the magnetic lasso tool, and this tool is very interesting. I'm going to zoom in here on the image onto this subway sign. The magnetic lasso tool is great because it allows us to trace over shapes and automatically snap along edges. I'm going to cut out this U in the Union Square sign. So with the magnetic lasso tool selected, I'm going to simply click and then start dragging. Points are automatically added, and it's following the outline of this letter. This tool works great in areas of high contrast, and obviously black and white have about the highest contrast you can get. So all I'm really doing is tracing along the edge of this letter. And there's my hollow circle that lets me know that I can complete the selection. Now, it's not perfect, but I can move the mouse in here, Command click on the Mac, Control click on the PC, and I've made a very rough cutout of that U shape. One of the issues that new users have when they first try the magnetic lasso tool is they trace around an object and they get a very rough result that's a little sloppy, kind of like what we just saw. And then they give up on the tool and say, oh, it doesn't work. But if we go up here to the options bar, there are settings that can help us get a better result. First, I'm going to undo what we just did, Command Z on the Mac, Control Z on the PC. Up here in the options bar, we have a setting for width. That tells the tool how far out from the edge it should look. That's fine at 10 pixels. Contrast determines the amount of difference in contrast between what's going to be selected and what isn't. And that's what we're going to change here. 10% is a little low. We'll change this to maybe 40% and see what that does. Frequency just tells the tool how often it should place the anchor points. I think we're fine at 11. So with that new setting, let's go down and try that U again. I'm going to deselect with Command D on the Mac, Control D on the PC. And now let's see what we have. We'll start here tracing around the edge. We're moving up. Much nicer result. We didn't get that little spillover. And there's our hollow selection. So we'll close it up. And a much better and tighter selection. So now if I cut this out, you can see a big difference. So when you're going to use the magnetic lasso tool, spend a couple of minutes experimenting with those width, contrast, and frequency settings, and you can get really great results with very little effort. For our next lesson, we're going to open up a separate image. So for now, you can simply close this without saving.